The water around Ambassador Cathara turned a deep red color, and it was not from the coral reefs. Her people's blood mixed with the ocean as another plasma blast tore through the crystal dome above her city. She pressed her webbed hands against the communication console, her bioluminescent patches flickering with panic signals that no one could see anymore. Zelthara Prime had been beautiful once. The greatest city of the Confederation sat beneath the waves of their homeworld, its towers made of living crystal that grew with the tides. Schools of bright fish swam through the streets while children played in the kelp gardens. Now the towers lay broken, their crystal hearts shattered by weapons that fell from the sky like angry stars. Cathara tried not to look at the bodies floating past her window. Her people were not built for war. They had evolved in the peaceful depths, becoming diplomats and artists and scientists. Their hands were made for gentle work, their voices for harmony. The strongest weapon they had ever created was a fishing net. The Vexhai Empire had different ideas about strength. "Ambassador," her aide whispered, his voice trembling through the water. "The northern districts are gone. They're targeting the nursery grounds next. The nursery grounds, where their young learned to swim, where new life began in the safety of the deep gardens." Cathara closed her eyes and felt something die inside her that was not just grief. It was hope. She had sent messages to every species in the known galaxy. 47 different civilizations had received her pleas for help. The responses came back like stones thrown into still water, each one creating ripples of disappointment. The Arcanian Federation was too far away. The Solari Collective was dealing with their own border disputes. The mighty Zentaran Empire simply said they could not spare the resources. One by one, every species found reasons to stay away from the HFY War machine. Cathara understood. She was not angry with them. The Vexhai had conquered world after world for 200 years. Their ships were fast and deadly, their soldiers, trained from birth to kill without mercy. They took what they wanted and destroyed what they could not use. Any species that stood against them joined the long list of the extinct. But understanding did not make watching her people die any easier. Another explosion shook the command center. The lights flickered as power systems failed throughout the city. In the dim emergency lighting, Cathara could see the faces of her staff. They looked to her for answers she did not have, for hope she could not give them. "Ma'am," the communications officer called out. "We're receiving a response to our distress calls." Cathara felt her heart sink. Another polite refusal. Another explanation of why her people would have to face extinction alone. She swam over to the console anyway because that was what ambassadors did. They kept working even when the work seemed pointless. "Which species?" she asked. "Unknown, ma'am. They call themselves humans? From a planet called Terra." Cathara frowned. She had studied the galactic database for most of her life, memorizing the names and customs of every known civilization. She had never heard of humans or Terra. "Are you sure about the name?" "Yes, ma'am. The message is very short." The officer played the transmission. The voice was strange, deeper than most species, with harsh consonants that sounded almost aggressive, but the words were in perfect galactic standard. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Space Force. We received your distress call. Help is coming. Hold your positions until we arrive. Terra out." Silence filled the command center. Cathara replayed the message 3 times, trying to understand it. Most diplomatic communications were long and formal, full of proper greetings and careful language. This was more like a military order than a response to a plea for help. "Ma'am," her aide said quietly. "I checked the archives. Terra is listed in the old exploration records. What does it say?" The aide's bioluminescent patches dimmed with fear. "It's marked as a Class DO and death world. The notation says extreme caution advised and avoid contact with native species, if possible. A death world." Cathara had read about such places in school, but she had thought they were myths. Planets where life was so hostile that evolution became a constant war. Most species came from garden worlds, places where cooperation and peace led to intelligence. Death worlds supposedly created something else entirely. "How far away is Terra?" she asked. "Unknown, ma'am. The coordinates in the database are incomplete, but if they're responding to our call, they must have faster-than-light communication and travel." Another blast shook the city. This one was closer, strong enough to crack the reinforced walls. Water began to seep through the cracks, carrying the taste of destruction. "Admiral Chen," Cathara spoke into the communicator. "This is Ambassador Cathara of the Zeltharian Confederation. We are grateful for your response. But I must tell you, the Vexhai Empire has over 3,000 Warships, their technology is far advanced. Many species with greater military power than ours have chosen not to engage them. She paused, trying to find diplomatic words for what felt like a confession of hopelessness. I do not wish for your people to sacrifice themselves for a cause that may already be lost. The response came immediately, as if the human had been waiting for exactly those words. Ambassador, this is Admiral Chen. We've reviewed the tactical situation. The Vex-High are bullies, and Terra has extensive experience dealing with bullies. Maintain your defensive positions and protect your civilians. We'll handle the rest. The transmission ended before Cathara could respond. She stared at the communicator, trying to process what she had just heard. The human had spoken about the Vex-High Empire like they were a minor problem, something to be handled rather than feared. Ma'am, the communications officer said, I'm picking up massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. Something's coming out of hyperspace. Cathara's aide pulled up the sensor readings. Whatever was approaching it was big. Multiple contacts, moving in formation. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest like a candle in the wind. Then reality crashed back down. Even if these humans were real, even if they truly intended to help, what could one unknown species do against the Vex-High war machine? She had seen the enemy fleet with her own eyes. Thousands of ships, each one capable of destroying a city in minutes. All citizens are to remain in the deep shelters, she announced to the city. Maintain life support and emergency protocols, and prepare to document whatever happens next. If her people were going to die, at least they would bear witness to the species that tried to save them. Perhaps future archaeologists would find the records and know that someone had cared enough to try. Outside the crystal dome, the ocean carried the sounds of war. Plasma fire turned the water to steam. Metal screamed as ships died in the darkness above. And somewhere beyond the reach of sensors, something called Terra was coming to join the battle. Cathara pressed her hands against the console and waited for either salvation or the final darkness. She had done everything an ambassador could do. The rest was in the hands of strangers from a world marked with warnings about death. In the depths of her city, children huddled in the shelters and asked their parents when the fighting would stop. The parents had no answers to give them, but high above the water, something new was about to change the rules of the galaxy forever. War Master Thexnol stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the destruction below with satisfaction. His chitinous armor gleamed under the harsh lights, and his forearms moved in practiced patterns as he directed the bombardment of another, Zeltharian city. The Vex-High had perfected war over 2 centuries. They struck fast and hard, overwhelming their enemies before resistance could form. Most species surrendered after seeing what happened to the first few worlds. The smart ones negotiated tribute rather than face extinction. The Zeltharians were not smart. They kept fighting even as their cities burned, even as their fleets were scattered like leaves in a storm. It was almost admirable in its stupidity. War Master, his tactical officer reported, the northern hemisphere is secure. Resistance in the southern districts is collapsing. Good. Begin harvesting operations on the conquered territories. Strip everything useful and prepare the population for transport. The Vex-High had no interest in governing other species. They took what they wanted and left the rest to figure out how to survive. Most didn't. The galaxy was full of dead worlds that had once defied the Empire. Sir, the communications officer interrupted. I'm detecting unusual chatter on the resistance frequencies. Something about help coming? Thexanol made a sound that might have been laughter if his species understood. Humor, more false hope. The council species have already refused their calls for aid. List the responses for my amusement. The Arcanian Federation cited distance concerns. The Solari Collective mentioned border security issues. The Zentoran Empire stated they could not spare the resources. The officer paused. But there's something else, sir. Multiple sources are mentioning a species called humans from a world called Terra. Never heard of them. Probably another minor power looking for glory. What do our databases say? That's strange, sir. Terra appears in the old exploration records, but most of the data is restricted or incomplete. What I can access is concerning. Thexnol turned his attention fully to the officer. In 200 years of conquest, he had learned to pay attention when his subordinates seemed worried. Explain. Terra is classified as a Class 13 death world, sir. The highest danger rating in the galactic scale. The exploration notes recommend avoiding contact with native species. Impossible. No species could develop spaceflight technology on a Class 13 world. The environment would kill them before they achieved fire. But even as he said it, Thexanol felt something cold creep into his mind. He had heard stories, whispered rumors from the frontier territories, stories about worlds so hostile that they defied understanding, places where evolution became a war that lasted millions of years. "Sir," the intelligence officer spoke up, "I've accessed some of the older files. The data is disturbing." "Show me." The main screen lit up with a holographic display of a blue and green world. It looked peaceful enough, with white clouds swirling over vast oceans. But the data scrolling beside it told a different story. Gravity is 30% higher than galactic standard. Atmospheric oxygen levels would be toxic to most species. Surface temperatures range from -40 to +50 degrees on the standard scale. The officer's voice grew quieter. And that's just the beginning. More data appeared. Charts showing magnetic field variations that would scramble most navigation systems. Seismic activity that would level cities built to galactic standards. Storm systems that generated energy outputs comparable to military weapons. The planet is essentially hostile to life, the officer continued. Yet the survey teams found thousands of species all engaged in constant predation. The dominant species, these humans, appear to have evolved from pack hunters. Pack hunters? Thexanol had fought many species, but most civilized races evolved from herbivores or omnivores. Predator species rarely developed the cooperation needed for spaceflight. Yes, sir. Pursuit predators specifically. They evolved to chase prey across vast distances until it collapsed from exhaustion. The survey notes describe them as persistence hunters with tool-making capabilities and pack coordination. The bridge fell silent. Every HFY warrior understood the implications. Their own species had been ambush predators before developing technology. They knew the mindset, the cold calculation that came with hunting for survival. But persistence hunters were different. They were patient, relentless, willing to spend days tracking a single target. What else do the files say about their technology? Level? That's where it gets interesting, sir. The surveys are over 300 years old, but they show evidence of early atomic weapons and space travel. If they've been developing at a normal rate since then. The officer didn't need to finish. 300 years was enough time for any species to spread across multiple star systems. Enough time to develop serious military technology. "Sir," another voice interrupted. It was the sensor officer, and he sounded nervous. "We're detecting energy signatures at the edge of the system. Something big is coming out of hyperspace." Thexanol moved to the tactical display. The sensors showed multiple contacts moving in tight formation. The energy signatures were strange, unlike anything in the HFY databases. "How many ships?" "Unknown, sir. The emissions are interfering with our scans, but preliminary estimates suggest at least 200 vessels." 200? Thexanol laughed, but it sounded forced even to his own ears. "We have 3,000 ships in this system. Whatever these humans think they're doing, they're about to learn why the galaxy fears the HFY Empire." But as he spoke, more reports came in. Intelligence officers across the fleet were accessing what little data existed about Terra and its inhabitants. The picture they painted was unlike anything the HFY had encountered before. "Sir," his aide whispered, "there are reports from the outer colonies. Ships with unknown markings have been seen in several systems. They don't respond to hails, don't engage in commerce, they just watch." "Scouts?" "Possibly. But the descriptions are strange. The ships look damaged, scarred, like they've been in constant battle but never bothered with repairs." More data came in from across the fleet. Stories from traders, fragments from old databases, whispered rumors from the frontier worlds. All of it painted the same picture. Terra was not just a death world, but the home of a species that had turned their hostile environment into a weapon. "War Master," the communications officer called. "We're receiving a transmission from the unknown fleet." "Put it through." The voice that came over the speakers was unlike anything Thexanol had heard before. It was deep, rough, with an accent that seemed to chew the words before spitting them out. But the message was in perfect galactic standard. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Space Force. You have 30 minutes to withdraw your forces from Zeltharian space and return to your own territory. This is your only warning." The bridge fell completely silent. In 2 centuries of conquest, no one had ever spoken to the HFY Empire like that. No one had ever given them ultimatums or warnings. They were the ones who did the threatening. Thexanol activated the reply channel, drawing himself up to his full height. "This is War Master Thexanol of the HFY Imperial Fleet. You are outnumbered 15-1, and you dare to threaten us? Your species must have a death wish. The humans' response came immediately. War Master, we've been studying your tactics for the past 6 months. You rely on overwhelming force against civilized opponents who fight by civilized rules. We're not civilized. The transmission cut off before Thexnol could respond. He stared at the communication panel, trying to process what he had just heard. The human had sounded amused, as if the idea of being outnumbered was somehow funny. All ships, he ordered, prepare for battle. These Deathworlders are about to learn why we rule 47 star systems, but as the Vexhai fleet moved into attack formation, whispered conversations spread through the ranks. Soldiers who had never known defeat began to wonder about enemies who came from a world that tried to kill them every day. Officers who had conquered civilization started to question what they might face from a species that had evolved in constant warfare. And in the depths of space, the human fleet waited with the patience of born hunters. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the TSF Indomitable, watching the enemy fleet arrange itself for battle. Her weathered hands gripped the railing as tactical displays showed the full scope of what they faced. 3,000 Vexhai, warships against her fleet of 212. Most species would call those impossible odds. Sarah called it Tuesday. Admiral, her tactical officer reported, enemy fleet is moving into standard attack formation. They're positioning for a long-range engagement. Sarah nodded. She had studied every available recording of Vexhai battle tactics for the past 6 months. They were good at what they did, she had to give them credit. Fast, efficient, overwhelming. They used superior numbers and advanced energy weapons to crush resistance before it could organize. It was a strategy that worked well against civilized opponents who followed the accepted rules of galactic warfare. Sarah's fleet didn't know those rules and wouldn't have followed them anyway. Status report, she ordered. All ships report ready for combat. Marine companies are standing by in assault pods. Engineering teams have completed final modifications to the kinetic systems. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The modifications had been her idea, based on combat experience from the Proxima Rebellion. If you couldn't match an enemy's technology, you changed the rules of engagement. Communications, open a channel to Ambassador Cathera on the surface. The Zeltharian's image appeared on the main screen. She looked exhausted, her bioluminescent patches dim with grief and fear. Behind her, Sarah could see the wreckage of what had once been a beautiful underwater city. Admiral Chen, the ambassador said, I cannot express our gratitude that you came. But I must tell you honestly, the Vexhai fleet is enormous. I do not want your people to die for a lost cause. Ambassador, Sarah replied. My species has never met a lost cause it didn't like. Keep your people in the shelters and let us handle the rest. She cut the connection before Cathara could argue. There would be time for diplomacy later, assuming any of them survived the next few hours. Admiral, the communications officer called. Incoming transmission from the Vexhai flagship. Put it through. The alien that appeared on screen looked like evolution's idea of a living weapon. 4 arms, chitinous armor, eyes that held the cold intelligence of a born killer. Sarah had seen the type before in her own species' history. Natural predators who had turned warfare into an art form. I am War Master Thexnol, the creature said. You will withdraw immediately or face destruction. We have no desire to waste ammunition on foolish martyrs. Sarah studied the alien for a moment. Arrogant, confident, used to enemies who backed down at the first show of force. She had dealt with bullies before. War Master, she said calmly. I'm Admiral Sarah Chen. In approximately 3 minutes, my fleet is going to demonstrate why Terra is classified as a death world. You have that long to order your ships to withdraw. You threaten us with 200 ships against 3,000? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm stating a fact. Thexnol made a sound that might have been laughter. Your species must be insane to attack us with such poor odds. Probably, Sarah agreed. But that's what makes us good at this job. She cut the transmission and turned to her crew. Every face she saw reflected the same expression. Calm determination mixed with anticipation. These were not the faces of people preparing to die. These were the faces of predators who had finally found worthy prey. All ships, she announced on the fleet channel. This is Admiral Chen. You know the drill. Fast, close, and personal. Show them what Deathworlders do when someone hurts our friends. The response came back from 200 ships as one voice. Aye, Admiral. Sarah had served in the Terran Space Force for 32 years. She had fought in the colonial wars, the pirate suppressions, and the first contact disasters that had taught humanity how brutal the galaxy could be. In all that time, she had never commanded a fleet going into battle where victory seemed impossible. She had to admit it felt good. All ships, execute attack plan Alpha. The human fleet moved forward, and immediately every tactical display in the Vex-High Armada began screaming warnings. The Deathworlders weren't following any recognized pattern. Instead of forming neat battle lines at maximum range, they were diving straight into the teeth of the enemy formation. Kinetic batteries target their forward screen, Sarah ordered. The space around the human fleet lit up with streams of metal moving at significant fractions of light speed. Where Vex-High energy shields deflected plasma and laser fire with ease, they had never been designed to stop solid projectiles moving at relativistic velocities. The first Vex-High ships died in seconds, their shields overloading as tungsten rods punched through hulls like paper. Explosions blossomed throughout their forward ranks as atmosphere vented into space and reactor cores went critical. "Ma'am," the tactical officer reported, "enemy fleet is trying to adjust formation. They're pulling back to maintain distance." Not happening. All ships, full acceleration. Get inside their formation before they can reorganize. This was what Sarah's species did best. Not the neat, orderly warfare of advanced civilizations, but the brutal close-quarters fighting that evolution had burned into their genes. Humans had never learned to fight fair because their homeworld had never given them the luxury of fairness. The Vex-High fired everything they had. Energy beams that could vaporize asteroids lashed out at the advancing human ships. For a moment, space looked like the heart of a star as weapons designed to destroy cities focused on Sarah's fleet. But the human ships kept coming. Their hulls were scarred and battered from previous battles, patched with armor that looked crude. Compared to the sleek Vex-High vessels, they absorbed punishment that should have crippled them and kept fighting. "Boarding parties, prepare for deployment," Sarah ordered. This was the part that would either win the battle or kill them all. While other species fought their wars with clean energy weapons at safe distances, humans had never outgrown their preference for close combat. If you really wanted to beat an enemy, you had to look them in the eye while you did it. "Admiral," her aide said quietly, "are you sure about this? Standard doctrine says we should maintain range and use our kinetic advantage." Sarah turned to look at the young officer. He was fresh from the academy, still thinking in terms of textbook tactics and reasonable strategies. She remembered being that young once, before the galaxy taught her that reasonable strategies didn't work against unreasonable enemies. "Lieutenant," she said, "standard doctrine is for fighting civilized opponents. The Vex-High spent 2 centuries conquering species who fought by the rules. We're going to show them what happens when the rules don't apply." The human fleet crashed into the Vex-High formation like a hammer hitting glass. Ships that had never known defeat suddenly found themselves facing enemies who rammed their vessels when conventional weapons weren't enough. Boarding pods launched from human cruisers carried soldiers who had evolved from persistence hunters, beings who would keep fighting long after any rational creature would have surrendered. On the surface of Zelthara Prime, Ambassador Kethara watched her sensors with disbelief. The impossible was happening above her world. The Vex-High fleet, which had seemed unstoppable just hours before, was falling apart under the assault of creatures from a world that evolution had spent millions of years trying to kill. "Ma'am," her aide whispered, "what are they?" Kethara thought about the question. She had studied every known species in the galaxy, learned their cultures and their capabilities. None of them fought like this. None of them treated warfare as if it were a natural extension of their existence, I think, she said slowly. "They're what happens when a Deathworld wins." The first boarding pod hit the Vex-High cruiser with enough force to crack the hull plating. Inside, Sergeant Marcus Webb felt his teeth rattle as the pod's cutting systems burned through 3 meters of alien armor. Around him, his squad of Terran Marines checked their weapons one final time. "Breach in 10 seconds, the pod's AI announced. "Hostile atmosphere detected. Recommend sealed environment protocols." Marcus laughed. His species had evolved breathing an atmosphere that would kill most galactic civilizations. Whatever the Vex-High, considered breathable air was probably safer than the smog of old Detroit. "Lock and load, Marines," he called to his squad. "Time to show these bugs what Terra breeds." The cutting beam finished its work and the pod's front section blew inward. Marcus was the first through the breach, his rifle already firing at the Vex-High soldiers waiting on the other side. Behind him came 11 more Marines, each one carrying weapons designed for the kind of close-quarters fighting that civilized species tried to avoid. The Vex-High were good soldiers. Marcus had to give them credit for that. They had positioned themselves well, used cover effectively, and their weapons hit hard enough to punch through standard armor. Under normal circumstances, they would have slaughtered any boarding party stupid enough to force entry into their ship. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Marcus's squad wasn't from a normal world. The first alien to die learned that human reflexes were faster than anything evolution had produced on garden worlds. The second discovered that Terran body armor was designed to stop projectiles moving at velocities that would liquefy most organic tissue. The third found out that humans didn't stop fighting when they were wounded. They just got angry. Marcus put 3 rounds through the chitinous chest plate of a Vex-High officer, then used the alien's own weapon to clear the corridor ahead. His squad moved like a pack, covering each other's movements with the kind of coordination that came from millions of years of hunting together. Sector 7 clear, he reported into his comm unit. Moving to engineering, similar scenes played out across dozens of Vex-High ships as human boarding parties forced their way through hulls that had never been breached by enemy action. The Vex-High fought back with everything they had, but they were fighting an enemy that had evolved for exactly this kind of warfare. On the bridge of his flagship, Warmaster Thexnol watched his fleet fall apart around him. The tactical display showed impossible things happening. His ships were being rammed by human vessels that should have been destroyed by concentrated fire. His boarding parties were being slaughtered by enemies who fought with a savagery that defied understanding. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we've lost contact with 47 ships. The humans are tearing through our formation." "How is this possible?" Thexnol demanded. "We outnumber them 15 to 1. "They're not fighting like any species we've encountered before, sir. They close to point-blank range and use kinetic weapons that punch straight through our shields. And their boarding tactics?" The officer paused, checking his reports again as if he couldn't believe what he was reading. "Sir, our boarding parties report that the humans keep fighting even when mortally wounded. We've had confirmed kills get back up and resume combat. Medical analysis suggests their physiology is designed for massive trauma tolerance." Thexnol felt something cold settle in his stomach. His species had conquered 47 worlds by understanding their enemies' capabilities and limitations. But these humans seemed to have no limitations, only different ways of inflicting destruction. "Pull back to long range," he ordered. "We'll use our energy weapons to pick them apart from a distance." "Sir, they're not letting us withdraw. Every time we try to create distance, they accelerate to match us. Their ships are faster than anything in our databases." On the screen, Thexnol watched a human cruiser ram one of his destroyers at full speed. Instead of being destroyed by the impact, the human ship kept firing even as both vessels spun out of control. The destroyer's reactor core went critical seconds later, taking both ships with it. "They're using their own vessels as guided missiles," the tactical officer reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "Sir, what kind of species commits suicide attacks with capital ships?" "The kind that comes from a death world," Thexnol said, quietly. More reports came in from across the battle space. Human fighters were using weapons that seemed designed to cause terror rather than clean destruction. Explosive rounds that sent shrapnel through ship corridors, chemical agents that corroded Vex-High breathing apparatus, sonic weapons that disrupted their communication systems. But it was the humans themselves that truly horrified their enemies. Vex-High soldiers who had never known fear found themselves facing enemies who laughed as they died, who turned their own blood into weapons, who kept advancing even with limbs torn off by plasma fire. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving surrender requests from 36 of our own ships." 36 ships surrendering? In 200 years of conquest, Thexnol had never heard of a Vex-High vessel surrendering to anyone. His species fought to the death as a matter of honor and genetic programming. "Denied," he snarled. "All ships will fight until—" "Sir, you don't understand. They're not asking for permission to surrender. They're informing us that they already have. The humans are offering medical assistance to wounded Vex-High soldiers." Thexnol stared at the officer in confusion. Medical assistance? In the middle of a battle where his forces were being systematically destroyed? "Explain." "The humans are providing emergency medical care to our wounded, sir. They've set up field hospitals on captured ships and are treating Vex-High casualties alongside their own." This made no sense. Species that fought with such brutal efficiency didn't waste resources on enemy wounded. They certainly didn't risk their own medical personnel to save the lives of beings they had just been trying to kill. "Are they interrogating the prisoners?" "No, sir. They appear to be simply helping them. Our soldiers report that the humans are sharing food, water, even entertainment media while they recover from injuries." Thexnol felt the last of his certainties crumble. He understood warfare, had studied every aspect of it for his entire life. But this was something beyond warfare, something that his military training had never prepared him to face. On the main tactical display, the battle continued to rage. But it was no longer a battle in any sense that the Vexhai understood. It had become a demonstration of what happened when a species that had evolved in constant conflict decided to make war on their enemies. Human ships continued their relentless advance, absorbing damage that should have crippled them, and responding, with violence that seemed to come from some primal core of their being. They fought not just to win but to completely overwhelm their opponents through sheer psychological pressure. "Sir," the sensor officer called out, "the human flagship is requesting communication." Thexnol almost laughed. The human admiral wanted to talk, while her ships were tearing his fleet apart piece by piece. "Put her through." Admiral Chen's image appeared on the screen. She looked tired but satisfied, like a predator that had just finished a successful hunt. Behind her, Thexnol could see human officers working calmly at their stations, as if the total destruction of a superior enemy force was just another day's work. "War Master," she said, "I'm offering you one final chance to withdraw your remaining forces. We've disabled or destroyed 60% of your fleet. Your soldiers are requesting medical assistance faster than we can provide it. End this now." "You expect me to surrender to Deathworld barbarians?" Chen's expression didn't change. "I expect you to make the smart choice. You came here to conquer peaceful people who couldn't fight back. You found people who could. Learn from the experience. And if I refuse, then we'll finish what we started. Your choice, War Master." Thexnol looked around his bridge at officers who had never known defeat. He saw fear in their eyes for the first time in their lives. Fear of an enemy that fought without limits, that treated warfare as if it were a natural function of their existence. "All ships," he said quietly, "begin withdrawal to the edge of the system." As the surviving Vexhai vessels limped away from the battle, Thexnol sent one final message to his high command. It was short, simple, and would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. "Do not engage the species called humans. They are not like us. They do not fight wars. They fight for survival, and they are very, very good at it." Ambassador Kithara floated in the medical bay of the human ship Indomitable, watching her people receive care from beings who had just finished destroying the most feared military force in the galaxy. The contrast was so stark it hurt to think. About Dr. Elizabeth Santos moved between the wounded Zeltharians with gentle efficiency, her hands steady, as she treated injuries that would have been fatal without immediate intervention. She spoke softly to each patient, explaining what she was doing, asking about their comfort levels. "The coral grafts should heal completely in about 6 weeks," she told a young Zeltharian, whose arm had been nearly severed by plasma fire. "We've accelerated the cellular regeneration process, but you'll need to keep the limb immobilized until the new growth stabilizes." The young male's bioluminescent patches flickered with confusion. "Doctor, why are you helping us? We are not your people?" Dr. Santos paused in her work, considering the question. "Because you needed help and we could provide it. That's reason enough." Kethara had been asking herself the same question for 3 days now. The humans had arrived like avenging angels, destroyed a fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, then immediately began providing humanitarian aid to both sides of the conflict. It made no sense according to any model of galactic politics she understood. "Ambassador," a familiar voice called behind her. She turned to see Admiral Chen approaching, still wearing her combat uniform but moving with the easy confidence of someone whose war was finished. "Admiral," Kethara replied, inclining her head in the formal greeting of her people. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did for us, but I confess I do not understand it." "What don't you understand?" "Your people fought with a violence that terrified hardened Vexhai soldiers. Then you immediately began providing medical care to the same enemies you were trying to kill. You share your food, your medicine, even your entertainment with prisoners of war. Why?" Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment, watching Dr. Santos work with a wounded Vexhai officer whose chitinous armor had been cracked by explosive decompression. "On Terra," she said finally, "we have a saying. Speak softly and carry a big stick. It means that true strength doesn't need to prove itself through cruelty. We fought hard because fighting hard was what the situation required. Now the situation requires healing, so we heal. But your tactics, the ramming attacks, the boarding actions, your soldiers seem to enjoy the violence." "Some of them probably did," Chen admitted. "Humans are complicated. We can be the most violent species you've ever seen, or the most compassionate, sometimes in the span of a few minutes. That's what 3 billion years of evolution on a death world gives. You the ability to switch between extreme states as the situation demands. Cathara tried to process this. Most species she knew had evolved toward consistency, toward predictable responses to given stimuli. The humans seemed to have evolved toward adaptability itself. "Admiral," she said carefully, "what happens now? The Vexhai Empire will not forget this defeat. They may return with larger fleets. They won't." The certainty in Chen's voice was absolute, like someone stating that water was wet or that stars were hot. "How can you be sure?" "Because we've been monitoring their communications for the past 6 months. War Master Thexanol's final report to High Command has already caused 3 separate fleet admirals to resign rather than risk facing human forces. The Vexhai are bullies, Ambassador. Bullies fold when they meet someone who hits back harder than they do." As if to prove her point, a communication came through on the ship's intercom system. "Admiral Chen," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Vexhai High Command. They're requesting a formal ceasefire and diplomatic negotiations." Chen smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Tell them we'll consider it after they've withdrawn from all Confederation territory and provided reparations for the damage they've caused." "Yes, ma'am." Cathara stared at the Admiral in amazement. "They're asking you for terms?" The Vexhai Empire is asking for terms from a species they'd never heard of a week ago. Power is relative, Ambassador. A month ago they had the strongest fleet in this sector. Today 60% of that fleet is either destroyed or in our hands. Tomorrow every species in the galaxy will know that the Vexhai can be beaten. The implications hit Cathara like a physical blow. The balance of power that had kept the galaxy in a state of fearful stability for 2 centuries had just shifted permanently. The Vexhai Empire's reputation for invincibility was gone, destroyed by beings from a world that most civilizations avoided thinking about. "Admiral Chen," another voice called from the entrance to the medical bay. Cathara turned to see a tall, elegantly dressed being she recognized as Ambassador Velen of the Galactic Council. "Ambassador Velen," Chen replied, her tone neutral. "I wasn't expecting Council representatives so soon." "Admiral, the Council has sent me to offer Terra full membership and a permanent seat on the Security Committee. Given your impressive military capabilities, we feel it would be beneficial for all concerned if humanity joined the galactic community in an official capacity." Chen studied the Council representative for a long moment. Cathara could see the calculation in her eyes, the same cold intelligence that had torn apart the Vexhai fleet. "Ambassador," Chen said finally, "Terra appreciates the offer, but we're not interested in joining councils or committees. We have our own way of doing things." "But surely you must see the benefits of coordinated action, of civilized discourse." "The Zeltharian Confederation sent requests for help to every major power in the Council," Chen interrupted. "Every single one found reasons to stay away. Civilized discourse didn't save the cities that burned while your committees debated response protocols." The Council ambassador's expression tightened. "Admiral, I understand your species may be unfamiliar with the complexities of galactic politics, but surely we're plenty familiar with politics, Ambassador. We're just not interested in the kind that lets bullies rampage while bureaucrats hold meetings." Chen turned to Cathara. "The Terran Space Force will be establishing a permanent patrol base in this system, with your permission. Any species that wants to try their luck against the Confederation will have to go through us first." Cathara felt tears mixing with the water around her gills. "Admiral, I don't know what to say." "Say yes and we'll start building the station tomorrow." "Yes," Cathara whispered. "Yes, of course." Ambassador Velen looked between them with obvious frustration. "Admiral Chen, the Council cannot simply ignore a military force of your magnitude. There must be some framework for cooperation." "There is," Chen replied. "We protect species that need protecting. We destroy threats that need destroying. And we stay out of politics. If that aligns with Council goals, we can work together. If not," she shrugged, "stay out of our way." As the Council representative left, clearly unhappy with the response, Cathara realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. For the first time in centuries, a major military power was refusing to play by the established rules of interstellar politics. "Admiral," she said quietly, "are you sure this is wise? Making enemies of the Council could have serious consequences." "Ambassador," Chen replied, "my species spent 100,000 years making enemies of everything on our planet. including the planet itself. We're still here. The Council will learn to deal with it. Over the following weeks, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. The Vexi Empire had begun withdrawing from disputed territories without being asked. Pirate fleets that had operated for decades suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders. Species that had been victims for generations began to whisper about Deathworlders who fought for others without expecting payment. And on Terra, in the quiet offices of the Space Force Command, Admiral Sarah Chen looked at the star charts and began planning humanity's next move. The galaxy had spent centuries learning to fear the strong and ignore the weak. It was time to teach them a different lesson. Communications, she said to her aide. Send a message to all known civilizations. Keep it simple. Humanity is now accepting requests for assistance from any species facing extinction or conquest. No payment required. No political strings attached. Admiral, the aide asked, what if we get more requests than we can handle? Chen smiled, and for the first time in months it was a genuinely warm expression. Then we'll build more ships and train more Marines. Terra has been waiting 3 billion years for a worthy challenge. She looked out at the stars, each one representing countless worlds and species, some predators, some prey, most just trying to survive in a hostile universe. Time to show them what Deathworlders do when we decide to care about something. The galaxy would never be the same.